quite a bit different from the English ones. Specifically, they feature somewhat crusader-type imagery. Translated to English, the first few French lines go something like this. "O Canada, land of our ancestors, you wear a garland of glorious flowers because your arm knows how to carry the sword and carry the cross." These were actually the original lyrics because O Canada started life as a specifically French-Canadian patriotic song written in 1880, and the language about swords and crosses and ancestors would have had particular meaning to how the French-Canadian identity was understood in those days. Je suis un ananas. This is a reference to a line from a low-budget Canadian educational kids show from the 1980s called Télé Français. It was a show to help kids learn French and had mostly sunk into obscurity, but then got a second life as a source of absurdist memes in the late 2000s after people started sharing this clip of one of the grotesque puppet characters.
Oui, c'est vrai. Je suis un ananas. Je suis un ananas.
Justin Trudeau's real father. This is probably one of the most famous Canadian conspiracy theories of modern times, and I'm sure you've heard of it. The conceit is basically that Justin Trudeau looks a lot like young Fidel Castro, and that therefore Fidel Castro, who Justin Trudeau's parents were legitimately somewhat close to, is actually the Prime Minister's secret father. A lot of right-wing Canadians sort of playfully pretend to believe this, just because it can be a sort of silly way to explain why Justin Trudeau is supposedly so left-wing. But there are some people who have taken it really literally and have done things like analyze the precise whereabouts of Mrs. Trudeau during the 9-month window around Justin Trudeau's birth in order to prove that this actually happened. Devil hair. Queen Elizabeth came to the throne in 1952, and the first Canadian dollar bills to feature her portrait were controversial because people said you could see the face of the devil in her hair. There were all sorts of conspiracy theories about this, but it was just an innocent coincidence because the actual photo that the portrait was based on had the quote-unquote devil's face as well. They subsequently changed the portrait, and now those early bills are big collector's items. Weird PSAs. So, during the late 80s and early 90s, Canadian television aired a lot of really strange public service announcements on daytime TV that were targeted to children, telling them not to talk to strangers and look both ways before crossing the street and that sort of thing. A lot of Canadians of my generation have a unique mix of nostalgia and trauma when it comes to these PSAs, just because a lot of them were very poorly made or written and are thus remembered for all the wrong reasons. Fellow Canadian YouTuber Curtis Connor has done a good video about them. Oak Island Money Pit. This is basically just an incredibly deep, man-made hole that was discovered on Oak Island, Nova Scotia in the late 18th century. It has various structures and platforms and things inside of it, suggesting that it was made for some sort of purpose, but despite centuries of trying, no one has ever been able to get to the bottom of it, so to speak. The most popular theory, as the Money Pit nickname suggests, is that it is some sort of elaborately buried treasure, and people have come up with all sorts of wild theories, speculating that everything from the Ark of the Covenant to an unpublished Shakespeare play is hidden down there. Mackenzie King's occultism. So Mackenzie King was the Prime Minister of Canada for a substantial chunk of time in the first half of the 20th century. He was also pathologically superstitious and had a deep fascination with the occult, particularly seances with the dead. I talked a bit about this in my award-winning video on his political career. The extent of King's weird beliefs were hidden from the Canadian public for many years, but these days, I would argue it is fast becoming the thing that he is most known for. Shag Harbor. In 1967, Shag Harbor was the site of Canada's first major UFO sighting. It also remains one of the more credible and corroborated UFO sightings to this day. 11 different witnesses all claim to have seen a mysterious craft with glowing lights crash into the harbor, but no remnants of the ship have ever been found, leading to cries of a cover-up. Some call it the Canadian Roswell. The Peanut Butter Solution. The Peanut Butter Solution is an incredibly bizarre children's movie released in 1985 by the French-Canadian film producer Roch Demers. It involves a kid who loses his hair and then he tries to grow it back using peanut butter, but it works too well and then his hair starts growing out of control. The film was never that popular, but among those who saw it as kids when it first came out, many claimed that they found it deeply traumatizing just because of how aggressively weird it was. It was one of those movies where people often can't even remember if it was an actual thing or not.
For kids under 8, it might have been a little Tough.
Brother 12. So, Brother 12 was the name of a British man who started a cult on Vancouver Island in the 1920s. He became pretty popular and accumulated a pretty sizable army of wealthy followers who he happily took a lot of money from, mostly in the form of gold coins. But of course, eventually people got wise to his scam and he eventually fled to Switzerland, where he died in 1937. But it has been a lingering mystery as to what happened to all of the gold. We know he buried at least some of it in or around Vancouver Island, and to this day it still attracts treasure hunters to the area, though little has ever been found. Feet on BC beaches. This refers to a bizarre phenomenon of over a dozen severed feet washing up on Vancouver beaches between 2007 and 2018. These mysterious feet have caused a lot of media sensation, and the official explanation of them has always been pretty underwhelming. Experts basically just say that there are a lot more corpses in the ocean than most people realize, and that it is therefore perfectly normal for a certain amount of body parts to wash up on any beach.
14 feet and nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to worry about. I'm not sure I feel so good about that theory. Nothing to see here.
Mussolini of Montreal. There is a Catholic church in downtown Montreal that has become fairly infamous because its ceiling has a mural featuring a heroic depiction of Italy's former dictator Benito Mussolini. Located in Little Italy, the mural is an unsettling reminder of the degree that pro-fascist sentiment was once common in the community. Anne of Green Gables is plagiarized. Anne of Green Gables is a children's novel written in 1908 by Lucy Maud Montgomery that is probably the single most famous work of Canadian literature. It is also very likely plagiarized from a 1903 American children's novel called Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. The two books have incredibly similar characters, plots, and setting, which were noted by reviewers at the time. But this fact has been aggressively downplayed by generations of Canadian historians who have been eager to promote the legend of Anne of Green Gables as one of Canada's proudest patriotic achievements. All right, now before we get into some of the darker stuff, let us just take a quick break and talk about this week's video sponsor, my friendly friends over at Makeship. Now, as longtime viewers of this channel will know, I released a book last year called Canadamon, featuring 151 original characters that I made up in reference to various things from Canadian culture, including several of the things that we have talked about today. Now, unfortunately, there are no copies of this book still available for sale, but we do have the next best thing, this delightful Canadamon plushie that the Makeship people have made for me. So this character is called Nanaimo Bear. He is a combination of Canada's favorite animal, the bear, and Canada's most iconic coffee shop / wedding buffet snack treat, the Nanaimo Bar. I know I've done a lot of things in my life, but I feel like this character might be the cleverest thing I've come up with so far. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of collectible knickknacks, and this doll very much represents my attempt to come up with a unique and memorable collectible knickknack of my own, something that is cool and unique looking, but also a bit obscure, something where some of the fun comes with having to explain what it is to other people when they notice it on your desk or your shelf or whatever. The Makeship people did a tremendous job in bringing my vision of this character to life. As you can see, it is a pretty big and high quality thing, and it can be yours for only $27.99 if you click on the link in the thing below. Supplies are limited, order now. And now, back to the iceberg. Raelians. The Raelians are a UFO sex cult started by a Frenchman who goes by the name Rael and claims to be a messenger of the advanced alien race that created life here on Earth. He relocated his movement to Quebec in the 1990s, where it attracted a surprisingly large number of followers. To this day, most of the world's 20,000 or so Raelians are French Canadians. Their official symbol is this rather grotesque mashup. They had a brief moment in the international spotlight in 2002 when they claimed to have created the world's first cloned human baby, which was obviously a lie, but it did get them a lot of attention. Trotsky's Canadian jail. Leon Trotsky, the famed Russian communist revolutionary, lived briefly in New York City for a few months in 1917. When he tried to sail back to Russia near the end of World War I, his boat made a stopover in Nova Scotia, where he was arrested by British intelligence officers who declared him to be a German agent. He was sent to a Canadian prison camp for German POWs, where he stayed for a month before finally being allowed back to Russia. Trotsky hated Canada for the rest of his life. Sons of Freedom. The Sons of Freedom were an extremist faction of the already fundamentalist Doukhobor Christian sect that inhabited parts of Western Canada in the 20th century. The Freedomites, as they were known, basically believed that anything that was involved with the government in any way was satanic. Between the 1920s and the 1960s, they would periodically stage terrorist attacks, mostly in rural British Columbia, blowing up schools, bridges, trains, and power grids. They were also well known for staging nude protests as part of their demonstration of their willingness to defy any and all laws. Paul